Well, good morning and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Family Time Devotion. We're glad you've joined us. Today, once again, I'm joined by Van Ferguson, and he's been leading us through a study in the life of Joseph. I'm really excited to get back into that, so I don't want to take a lot of time here, but just one quick announcement before we get started, and that is remember that on August 16th, we'll be back in-house here. Our cleaning crews have worked so hard to get things sanitized, and they are doing that every single week after any function takes place here. And so they're ready for you in a safe environment for you to come back to church. So please mark your calendar and plan to be with us on August 16th. Well, Van, it's a pleasure to have you back. Thanks for the study so far. Today we're in Genesis chapter 39, and so lead us back into it, if you would.
Okay, here we Genesis chapter 39. If you were with us Monday, you know that Joseph had been sold into slavery, and his father had just recently found out about it. And so in chapter 39, verse 1, it tells us when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And so, kind of an introduction. I'm probably going to read a lot of this, I think. But purchased, it's so important, I think, before you get into the story to understand he's a slave, he's a piece of property, he has no rights. And so that changes a lot of the story, if you will, just knowing that he's been bought with a price. Verse 2 tells us, the Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. I absolutely love verse 2 because it didn't matter at all about his circumstances. Didn't matter what had happened to him, the fact that he is a slave now. The Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. Again, if we continue to study and read throughout this passage, if we studied on, we find again, eventually he's thrown into jail. The Bible says the Lord was with Joseph. It didn't matter what his circumstances, situation was like. And in all reality, as Christians, as followers of Christ, circumstances should not change our relationship with God. Doesn't mean that there aren't times where we won't question. We're human, we question, but at the same time, it shouldn't change. Even in the midst of heartache and pain, we should really draw closer to God and not stray. Oftentimes we will. I mean, we're human beings, but at the same time, it should draw us closer to God, even in the midst of our circumstances. I think about a verse that, oh my goodness, is taken out of context so much, particularly by athletes. I can do all things through Christ, which gives me strength. And yet, when you study the verse in context, everything before and after, you see that Paul was saying throughout the difficulties of life, with little, with much, with good health, bad health, being beaten, thrown in prison, whatever the case might be, I can do all things through Christ, which gives me strength. Which, I've heard this said, and it's so true, even dealing with athletes. That means that as a Christian athlete, your senior year in high school, and there's a good chance you're going to get to go play at UT in the last game of the year, you blow your knee out. I can do all things through Christ, which gives me strength. That's where I'm going to get my purpose in life. My strength comes from Jesus. Obviously, he's got a different plan for me, so we're going to go in a different direction. But learning to believe that God has a purpose and plan for everything. Even in Joseph's situation, being a slave, he's still, he's truly living what you're saying he's living by faith at this moment in time. I think of Matthew chapter 28 and verse 20, where Jesus said, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you are, what you're going through, even in the midst of a pandemic. God's in control, and hopefully our faith and trust is in Him and not our government. Our faith's in Christ, and so we'll make it.
Let me jump in because you struck a nerve there. So many people, even solid Christians, have panicked over this situation with the pandemic. Yeah, there is fear involved. Yeah, there is some wondering of where it's going and what it's going to do. But the truth is, we don't have to be afraid because of exactly what you're talking about. God is with us always. Yeah. It's not that He's been caught off guard by this. It's not that He's surprised or wondering, where is this going to take us? He knows it's part of the plan. Just as we saw as we were closing out Monday, God had a plan for Joseph's life. So God has a plan for our lives. And right now it involves this pandemic. Right. And we ought to look with excitement and anticipation at where God is taking us through this mess.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Verses 3 through 6, Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything that he did. This blessed Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. The only thing he even had to think about is, what am I going to eat today? Because Joseph was taking care of everything. And again, Joseph would do the same thing eventually in jail for the warden. It'd be the same type of scenario. But Joseph's, his attitude is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of depressing in a sense to watch this guy go through these trials. It's, he's a slave. You would never think that a slave would act like this. Yet, I think we could truly say Joseph is peculiar. I mean, he's weird, strange, and which from a biblical perspective, that's what we're called to be, is peculiar. We're aliens. This is not our home. We're just simply passing through. Whatever may happen to us, we're just simply passing through on our way to a place much better. And so he's obviously peculiar, and I think what's even more important here to keep in mind is that Potiphar, who would have been lost, Old Testament, but he would have been lost, but he notices it. He notices this is not normal. And yet that again should describe Christians, wanting to do what's right, seeking to do what's right. Potiphar, as a result of this, it changes his life, watching Joseph and the way that Joseph reacts and what Joseph does. And he literally gives Joseph the keys to his house. I mean, here it is, when you think about it, with the freedom that Joseph had been given, had he wanted to, he could have probably escaped. And yet, he never does. It's almost the idea, this is where God's placed me, obviously. God has a purpose. He's got a plan. And so it's like he seeks to be the best slave that he can possibly be, which again is so weird. But he seeks to be the best slave that he can possibly be. Actions speak louder than words, I guess is what you could say here. And I can't imagine anything being worse or more of a hindrance to Jesus, to Christianity, than a lazy employee with a bad attitude who claims to be a Christian.
Yeah.
I can't imagine anything being, a worse testimony, I guess, of what Christianity is than somebody that professes to be a Christian and yet lives that way. The Bible says Potiphar could see that God was with him, written all over him. Everything about him said this guy's a follower of God. And when you study other books of the Bible, you study the book of James, that's what it says. Faith without works is dead. If you, in all reality, there's more to it than just lip service. Yeah, we have to talk about it in order for someone to believe. They must hear. I mean, we got to share our faith, but even more importantly, after we share it, we've got to live it. And that was obvious here with Joseph. I mean, that's exactly how he lived and what he was doing. The last part, I'm going to read verse 6. It says, last part of verse 6 says this is something that you and I can relate to, a problem that we have. Jason, he wouldn't understand this at all. He can't imagine how hard it is to live this way, but we understand how Joseph feels here. It says, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. So you and I, we get this.
You know, it's been a long time since anybody said I was well-built.
And so anyway, you know, it tells us here in verses, as a matter of fact, I'm going to read on down from the last part of verse 6, 7, 8 through 13. It says, Joseph was a very handsome, well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to lust after him. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. Verse 8, but Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. She came, grabbed him by his cloak, demanded, come and sleep with me, and Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. And so Potiphar's wife obviously notices Joseph's a pretty good-looking guy, and so you keep in mind here the idea, this is something that Joseph is having to deal with day after day. She's approaching him. He's a piece of property. He's a slave. It's not like he can go put in for another job somewhere else. I mean, he is literally, again, he's forced to be in this situation. He can't get away with it. He does his best to run from her as much as he possibly can. But I love what he tells her in verse 9. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this to my master, first of all. He trusts me. There's a trust here. But even more importantly than that, it'd be a sin against God. And I think when I read this, for me, I mean, this is character. This is the idea of, we might be able to get away with this. My master may never find out about it. The problem is God knows. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely refuse to participate in something like this. And, I oftentimes think I bet David wished he would have listened to his heart. He listened to what God was telling him at that moment in time when he's staring at Bathsheba. And because all the heartache and pain that obviously came from it.
Let me jump in, because something to me is glaring here, and it even more so in the situation with David and Bathsheba, and that is that there's no insulation. Now, Joseph, as you said, is in a peculiar situation in that he's forced to be in the situation he's in. But I just wonder, being over the entire house, if he couldn't have insulated himself from Potiphar's wife, knowing what she had been doing. It said that she'd been doing this for a while, that she was always. I wonder if he could have insulated it. David certainly could have. King over the land. I mean, he could have spoke the word, and there would have been attendants there with him that would have held him accountable. The only reason I say that is because I think a lot of times in our day and time we get into trouble because we don't insulate ourselves. We don't protect ourselves. God gives us common sense. He gives us wisdom to say, this is a dangerous situation. You'd better do something to protect yourself in this, or you're going to cave. Yeah. We know our weaknesses. We know where we're vulnerable. For most of us guys, it's in this area of lust and sex. And so we've got to be aware of that, and there's got to be some guards put in place if we want to protect ourselves, if we want to protect our marriage, and if we want to not sin against God.
And it's kind of funny because I've used this so much in my life, but we get to see how Joseph does that here, like how he responds. And it's kind of funny. Yet, in my opinion, it's the best way to handle these types of situations, because as we read, finally, one day, she just physically attacks him. I mean, she's done with playing around with him, trying to entice him. She just physically attacks him. And Joseph did what I believe, and I tell college young men this all the time, he did something that's so profound. He didn't sit around and talk to her. He didn't have a conversation, try to reason with her at this point. I mean, when it gets to this point, he literally ran. He got out of that situation. When it finally got to that point and she just physically grabs a hold of him, he ran. And I believe that, and I believe he did this because Joseph was as much a man as you and I are. And he knew I'm capable of anything. If I stay in this situation very long, particularly now she's touching me, if I stay in this situation very long, I'm capable of doing anything. And so he ran. And I think, you talking about us having to be protective and put up kind of a shield in a sense and distance ourselves. And I tell college students this all the time, in relationships, even someone you're dating, and suddenly you find yourself, whether it was your purpose or not to do this, but suddenly you find yourself alone with that girl. And, you got to have boundaries, and in some cases you may have to run.
Absolutely.
I mean, you just got to get out of there as fast as you possibly can. You think about when it comes to computers and our phones, and I mean, I've found myself through the years numerous times, particularly with a phone, where it's like, you're just flipping. You flip through Facebook and suddenly see things, and particularly for a man, it's like, I mean, if you don't turn it off immediately, maybe get up and run. I mean, maybe get out of there, go find people to hold you accountable in a sense, whether they know what you're doing or not. But it's like, okay, I'm going to be in this group of people. I got to get away from this as quickly as I possibly can because the temptation's great. And, every time I read this, for whatever reason, it's funny, but I always think Forrest Gump. Just that run, Forrest, run. And, and that's the advice oftentimes I give these guys. And in regards to myself, when you find yourself in this, you've got to get out of there as quickly as possible because for men, this is our downfall. And this has destroyed countless men. And this could have destroyed Joseph. This could have destroyed an unbelievable testimony. Everything could have been changed by this had he not been careful and just simply ran.
Well, Van, great study again. A lot to think about, a lot to process, and certainly we need to be mindful of this as we go through our day. Is God putting this up for us now as a warning? Let's be mindful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I say it every time. I feel like you might get tired of hearing it, but please know we're here for you. If you need us, we're here. Just reach out. We will be glad to help any way we possibly could. All right? Well, have a wonderful week. We will see you Sunday online. If you want to come join us here in the auditorium, that's great. But if not, please be watching online. Our services start at 10:30, the scoop at 10:15. Talk to you then.